Welcome to the Politics and Society podcast. In this episode, we're diving into the chaos unfolding in the Dáil as a new government takes shape. So TDs returned to the House on Wednesday to nominate Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin as the new taoiseach. However, Sinn Féin and the opposition TDs voiced their anger throughout, seating as plans to allow independents who are supporting the government to join them on opposition benches. So Marv, first things first, what did you make of the proceedings on Wednesday?
Not really surprised, being perfectly honest with you. This was an issue that had been flagged for weeks as the coalition talks had been unfolding, because the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil had, I think we can say, a good election and had definitely been tipped to return to power together, but they needed an additional 2 seats for a majority, and so they went looking for independence. They settled on the regional independent group, which was being led by Michael Lowry, a very controversial figure in Irish politics, and this arrangement was already catching much ire from the opposition, but it kind of spilled over into a major row once it emerged that the regional independent group had agreed the programme for government with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So they helped negotiate the programme for government, and I think 3 of their ranks, so that would be Noel Grealish, Marion Harkin, and who was the third one again? Sean Kenny, would be becoming junior ministers, and then they were joined by Michael Healy-Rae as another junior minister, and then Danny Healy-Rae would join the regional technical group. So some of their numbers would be becoming junior ministers in the new government, and even though they had negotiated the programme for government essentially like a coalition partner, under the standing orders of the Dáil, the members of the regional independents who are not receiving ministerial office, so that's 6 of them. As I said, Danny Healy-Rae and Michael Lowry have already been mentioned. There's Barry Heenan here in Dublin Bay North, Gillian Toole, Carol Nolan, Matty McGrath. They would be able to keep their technical group, which under standing orders of the Dáil is automatically listed as an opposition group. So the opposition says here, we need to amend the standing orders so that these can take government speaking time and not opposition speaking time, because these are essentially going to be government backbenchers. But they weren't happy with commitments being made by, on one hand, the incoming government, and also by the new Count Carla Fiona Murphy, who, let's not forget, was originally a member of the technical group herself and had been nominated to that role by Michael Lowry. So that's what led to the chaos last Wednesday. I think it was clear to see that Fiona Murphy couldn't control the proceedings. The Dáil was suspended on 4 separate occasions before she decided to suspend it for the evening, and then we resumed then on Thursday after inter-party negotiations, and the proceedings were allowed to continue after the regional independents were denied speaking time on Thursday and a Dáil Reform Committee could be set up. But yeah, it was unprecedented scenes now, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely not an ideal first day in the office for Fiona Murphy, to say the least, And her appointment came with a bit of turbulence and controversy as well. And I know you, the historian, Marv, I've done a bit of my research here, looking into Micheál Martin. And as Micheál Martin said, it's the first time in over 100 years the Dáil has failed to elect a TD, or a taoiseach, apologies. So that just shows unprepared they were really for this kind of onslaught from the opposition. And now I know it's a different story as well.
The thing is,
when we're talking about...
sorry, just before I continue, I would combat that allegation from Micheál Martin that the first sitting of the Dáil in 1989, 1992, 2016, 2020 and 2024, there hasn't been a taoiseach elected. So it's not unprecedented for the Dáil to not elect a taoiseach on its first day of its new sitting. So I would say he was slightly exaggerating. I could probably understand maybe his personal frustration, but I wouldn't agree with his comments there. But it was unprecedented that the opposition shouted down the Count Carla. That's something I'm not aware of happening, not in recent years anyway. But I do definitely think they had a justifiable cause for anger,
Yeah, like it was... Like, personally for me, it was very unexpected, but I know then, as you pointed out to me, it did really lead to a case of everyone was kind of siding with the opposition. It was really seemed like a victory for the opposition here.
Yeah,
You had
100%.
like biased journalists, possibly, people you might have said would have leaned with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in the past, were coming out defending the opposition. You had neutrals as well. Even, eventually they had to kind of put their hands up and get on with it to elect their taoiseach, because there mightn't have been an end to this otherwise. So what does this say for this government? Like, this is the very first day you're after appointing a cabinet, or trying to appoint a cabinet, and this is what happens. Is this something underlying here showing that the opposition, like, has never been stronger, or is this going to be a passing of the torch moment? Will this be like the last of our Fine Gaels and Fianna Fáils? What do you think of that, Merv?
That's a big question, but it's interesting because I could talk a lot about this, but say, like, on the one hand, like, I think just the inclusion of Michael Lowry in any kind of government negotiations has been just so controversial. And one line we kept hearing from the opposition was stroke politics, the return of the stroke politics. So kind of really trying to, harbour back memories to, the old days of Charlie Haughey and Ray Burke and Porrick Flynn and that kind of a generation, and just trying to say, this represents a return to that. And I do think, it maybe showed some sense of kind of weakness, maybe a little bit of arrogance on the part of the incoming government, that they couldn't foresee how this was a problem. Because you're dead right, like, you had all the commentary, like, up to, say, people like Fianna Fáil, who would not usually, I find, be pro Sinn Féin, but we're all saying, like you can't have people who are government backbenchers taking opposition time. And personally, I would subscribe to that as well. Like, it's nothing like Jim Kemmy supporting the Fine Gael Labour coalition in 1982, or Tony Gregory supporting Fianna Fáil in 1982, or even Jackie Healy-Rae and Mildred Fox and Harry Blaney in 97 with Fianna Fáil Progressive Democrats, because there was no formal programme for government. They were just independents on the opposition benches who had just informal kind of constituency deals with the government. And the reason why Gareth Fitzgerald's government failed in 82 and Haughey's government failed later on in 82 is because Jim Kemmy and Tony Gregory withdrew their support, whereas Michael Lowry said, we're going to stick by this government in good days and bad. So I don't know. It kind of represented maybe a kind of some kind of an overconfidence, maybe, that they could proceed with this without addressing the issue. And yeah, it's not an ideal start, as you said. But also the other story is, like you said, with the opposition. That's been the big criticism of the opposition during the election campaign, that there was no coherent alternative being presented to the people during the election campaign. Okay, like, I know there's still kind of issues about the turnout of, what the actual turnout was. Was it potentially, not accurately reflected, because, say, the electoral register at the minute is not. There's debates at the minute of to how accurate it actually is, but I think it is clear that the turnout wasn't incredible. That if you want to sweep a government from power, you need a high turnout. And I think what a lot of people have been saying was that during the election campaign, the opposition campaign, it wasn't coherent, weren't kind of offering a coherent alternative. So I think this might represent an early stage of maybe opposition unity, of maybe trying to work closely together over the next number of years, so that when we get to the next general election, they kind of offer nearly a government in waiting. And again, look, 5 years is a long time in politics. We don't know what's going to happen.
But
yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting to see what goes on.
As you're saying, Marv, though, that's a good observation, that opposition unity, because that's exactly what we're seeing with the current government. The past two governments have been Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil combined. Now, you never would have thought that in previous times.
Indeed.
It's nearly as if the two of them are taking that Fianna Fáil vote of the past. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have kind of split it. As you're mentioning, the opposition has become ever stronger. It's interesting to note as well the fact that you're saying they just didn't offer like that prospect for government, the opposition. And we think about, the most pressing issues, time and time again, have been housing. The past 5 years has been plagued with housing. The past 2.5 years, Darragh O'Brien has had the housing portfolio. Fianna Fáil still managed to win the election by 8 or 9 of a majority. That is like, that's just showing like it. What's that saying about the electorate? Is it saying like they're happy with the situation? Because there was goals for this government to reach for social housing, and they didn't deliver on that side. Healthcare, there has been the hospital bed waiting lists, and that situation hasn't got any better. We still don't have a children's hospital. The prices are increasing. We're in a cost of living crisis. The situation seems to be worsening in many areas, especially around the key issues like housing and healthcare. Yet still, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil seem to prosper. That could be a conversation for another day now. But I think all of this has been underlying from the opposition, and even if you look at the opposition as a whole, the Social Democrats have 11 seats, well, 11 with an asterisk beside it. Is Owen Hayes, is he back in the party now, or what's the story
No,
there?
he's an independent. He's the first gene pool Social Democrat independent.
There you go, yeah. But and you also have Labour on 11, so that's 22 alone. They're joined it in with Sinn Féin. You're building a big opposition, and then if you had people like people before profits, if the Greens had a resurgence, in 5 years' time you could see a big coalition here, a rainbow coalition of different kind of left parties coming together. As I mentioned, that will be what we'll probably be discussing and looking at over the next 5 years and predicting. Moving forward then, proceedings followed after the chaos kind of halted, and we did manage to elect a new cabinet. So Micheál Martin was elected taoiseach, and we have a new cabinet appointed. So I'll just briefly go through that cabinet. Simon Harris was appointed taoiseach, Pascal Donoghue moved to finance, Jennifer Carroll MacNeill became the Minister for Health, James Brown housing, Jim O'Callaghan got justice, Jack Chambers for public expenditure, Ella McEntee, surprisingly enough, was moved to education, Derek Cleary for social protection, Darragh O'Brien for climate. Climate's one that we'll discuss. They've taken the integration out of climate and moved it to justice. Norma Foley moved to children, disability and equality, James Lawless for further and higher education, Martin Hayden to agriculture, Peter Burke, the only standing cabinet minister holding his portfolio here, he is enterprise, tourism and employment, and Patrick O'Donovan, the Minister for Arts. So a few surprises thrown in there, Marv, or were you surprised with the senior cabinet ministers?
Yeah, I mean, like there were some surprises and some things that weren't. So obviously we all knew Micheál Martin for taoiseach and Simon Harris for taoiseach, and it was also being tipped for a while that Harris would get foreign affairs and defence alongside being taoiseach, and that's exactly what happened. I think because they were the roles that Micheál Martin held as taoiseach, and I think the thinking is that they're going to need kind of a heavy hitter at cabinet in foreign affairs to negotiate the Trump presidency. I think that's why, interestingly, the department is now foreign affairs and trade. I think that's a statement on the Trump administration's desire to go after American FDI. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Pascal Donoghue for finance and Jack Chambers for public expenditure. I think that was also a change you could kind of easily foresee. But there was a few surprises. So Helen McEntee, I think she was definitely one who was being targeted to be moved out of justice. She was a very unpopular Justice Minister, and Jim O'Callaghan, despite there was talk of him taking up Attorney General, which to be honest it would be rather unprecedented for a sitting TD to serve as Attorney General. I think the last one was Declan Costello in the 70s. So he was, in my mind, I was thinking he always wanted justice. He famously turned down a junior minister role in the Department of Justice 4 years ago. Actually, got nearly 5 years ago. So he's got the job he's always wanted. But, there were a few surprises, like Charlie McConalogue getting dropped from Fianna Fáil is
Yeah,
quite
massive.
surprising. That's a big call. We can talk about that in a sec. But Martin Hayden of Fine Gael getting the nod, moved up to the front bench into the Department of Agriculture. Darragh O'Brien being moved out of housing again. Like it's a tough role. It is the number one issue being given to James Brown, first time minister from down in Wexford. So that's going to be a big challenge for him. Jennifer Carroll McNeil for health. That's again another second term TD. She's a good media profile. She's constantly kind of pushing herself. She reminds me of, say, like there was loads of talk in the 60s of, I mentioned them already, but say like Charlie Haughey and Neil Blaney, Donagh O'Malley, Brian Lennon, all them. Back in those days, they were called the young men in a hurry. These kind of young, kind of new TDs, just kind of impatient for progression through the ranks up to the front bench. And she kind of reminds me of that. She's kind of new to national politics and just kind of really pushing her profile out there. And she's got the Department of Health, which is one of the big departments. It's always something that causes controversy. Again, it's called Angola in government circles because you never know where the next landmine is going to come from. So that would be an interesting one for her. But yeah, no. Norma Foley getting pushed out of education. Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Charlie McConalogue there. That was quite surprising for two reasons. One being that, if you look at Donegal as a whole, the 5-seater, although Fianna Fáil did manage to get 2 seats out of the 5, you could have a resurgence of Fine Gael. Again, they could build from the ground up. There's a threat of a third Sinn Féin seat there. And McConalogue was fighting for that last seat. Absolutely fighting against Thomas Pringle. Just about scraped it. And although he did get the seat, Pat the Cope most likely won't be running if this government goes another 5 years. So there's another incumbent who won't be running. So, that could be potentially 2 seats gone from Donegal, which would be...
That's very true.
A terrible one to lose. And as well as that, there's actually no border senior ministers. There's no senior ministers on any of the border counties. None in Donegal, none in Cavan.
No, yeah, because Heather Humphreys is gone, yeah.
Yeah, so that could be a major blow. But as both of us were talking off air about is the gender balance. This could really cause a lot of problems for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
Very bad.
There's 1 in 5. 1 in 5.
It's pretty bad, particularly in the modern kind of day and age. It's not really a good look. And I think it might have been Ivana Basic in the Dail who noted, she said that there's as many ministers called James as there are women, which is an acute observation. So for context, that's 3. There's 3 ministers called James. So Jim O'Callaghan, so James Brown and James Lawless, and we've 3 women: Jennifer Carroll McNeil, Helen McEntee and Norma Foley. So, it's not a great look. Now, I think the counter argument was, well, don't forget we have female super juniors. So Mary Butler has taken the Chief Whip's job and Hildegard Naughton is going to be a junior minister in the Department of the Children. So, they're going to be sitting in our cabinet too, but it's not really a kind of it's going to be a hard one for them to combat, particularly because if you look, say, in the general election itself, there was the gender quota for all the parties to meet, to have their percentage of candidates had to be women. And then when it came down to it, I think Fianna Fáil were, the worst party in the new Dáil in terms of women representation. Fine Gael slightly better, and so that's why there was talk the other night on prime time. I think Louise O'Reilly was kind of trying to put the dagger in and say, well, maybe it's a problem that those parties aren't promoting women of talent to kind of winnable seats, whereas our party we have basically loads of women ready to go who are councillors and all this sort of stuff. So maybe there's an element of truth in that, but yeah, it's going to be a really, really difficult thing for them to deal with. I feel it's now we'll see what happens, how many junior ministers, because again, another thing of controversy, there's going to be 23 junior ministers, the most we've ever had, so we'll see how many of the new junior ministers are going to be women. But yeah, it's going to be a hard one for them to defend, I think.
And will we see a reshuffling in November 27. Is that when it's planned to be? November 2026?
I believe it is, yeah. That's when it's due to transfer, do the rotation again. So have Simon Harris, if he's still the leader of Fine Gael at that time, presumably he will be, become taoiseach. And I say, yeah, there should be a cabinet reshuffle by that time, and you'd reckon they'd be cognizant of how badly this looks, that they'll probably try to promote more women. As you mentioned, there have been some new women who've been elected in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. People like Aisling Dempsey, for instance, in your neck of the woods. And, so again, we'll see who gets given junior ministries now, that they could be in line for promotions in a reshuffle in 2027.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be something to point out, and it'll be interesting to see, there was enough chaos appointing the first cabinet, the second cabinet, if controversy arises in certain departments, you could have a outcry by the public, the opposition could get stronger, anything could happen, politics, it's unpredictable, so we'll just have to wait and see. So, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with anyone who might be interested in the latest political happenings. We'll catch you next time for more insight and analysis on the politics that shapes our society. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.